Mitch, right?
Yes.
What is most important?
Well, personally, having a good job, being able to support my family, seeing my children grow into worthwhile young adults and be successful on their own. Beyond that, we're all going to die. People are going to go extinct. Humans are going extinct eventually, sooner or later. And the sun is going to burn out, and it doesn't matter.
Entropy is going to rule the universe, huh?
It has and it does.
Okay. I'm trying to think if I could add any more questions to that, but I think I like that.
Okay.
Second question. What is your history with religion, and at what point did you decide you were or were not a part of it?
Well, I was raised in a non-religious family, so it was an easy thing for me. God was, when you grow up in the United States, in our culture, God is around, people are talking about it, but I guess having been raised by culturally Jewish parents, there was always a little bit of bias against the Christian-dominated culture. So it's easy to reject. So having everybody celebrate Christmas and the other Christian holidays, we didn't do that. So I never felt a part of it. And in any case, even from the Judaism point of view, God was not brought into the equation. It was just a cultural thing. We could have Hanukkah, and we could light candles and have latkes and brisket and whatever the tradition was, but it wasn't about God. It was just some tradition that they kept maintaining, but there was no doctrine behind it other than a story of the Maccabees. But you know, the Maccabees defending themselves from the Romans. That's a political thing.
We're good, thank you.
It's not a religious thing. So it was easy.
So there wasn't really a point where you decided, nah, that's not for me, or you just never really got involved?
Well, you know, when I was a teenager, there was a little time there where I was wondering, questioning whether, you know, God was a thing or Jesus was a thing that meant anything. And so I was toying with it. You know, it's right at that young teenage years where there was a lot of changes going on, both physically and mentally. But, you know, it was really never very serious because, you know, as soon as you think about it in any depth, ask any questions, the questions immediately get to a point where you can't answer them from a religious point of view. There's no rationality, no logic to it. It's completely based on faith. Well, and I having had none of that upbringing,
the indoctrination,
it's like, well, you could have faith in one of these things, but you could have faith in something else. Like, there wasn't a spaghetti monster in those days, but just as a point of contrast, it could be something equally ridiculous.
Well, and one thing I wanted to bring up earlier was that I do believe in things that I'm pretty sure don't actually exist. They are letters and numbers, and they are useful. And so if they can give me some utility to religion, I might consider it more. But mostly it just seems to me to be a method of control.
Well, at least in your specific example of letters and numbers, humans are symbolic animals. That's what allows us to have language. And as we talked about, chimps and gorillas and maybe orangutans and maybe, well, actually definitely other animals are capable of using symbols. Whether you want to consider that to be a form of language is open to debate. But in any case, we are a symbolic species. We are capable of it. And so letters and numbers are a way that we can use symbols to promote our communication. So it's not, I don't see it as having any religious consequence or context.
No, but it's a comparison about believing in something that it doesn't really matter whether it exists, it's just useful. Because numbers and letters don't really exist. We can draw them out, but you can't do that without drawing them out. You can't show that they exist.
Well, there's a lot of things. For the sake of argument, let's drop letters, but numbers exist in the sense that we can count the number of physical things. And so we assign a number to that quantity of physical things that we're counting. So, but there's other characteristics of physical things that we come up with, like red. So, would you say red is physical? Well, actually it is. Red is a wavelength. Or a certain length of wave or something. It's defined that way. And so, is a number an equivalent kind of thing that has a physicality? Maybe, maybe not. Whether you want to say that a number of items represents a fundamentally solid, absolute reality of a number, it's kind of getting too philosophical for me.
That's okay.
But, the fact that to say that it doesn't exist as an absolute.
Yeah, you can't. If you can imagine it, it exists on some level.
Well, that means God exists, and we don't want to go there.
Only on some level.
Right.
And not the level which everyone's been telling me.
Well, the fact is, there is a certain tangibility both to letters and numbers. We may create them in our minds. We created language based on something that didn't exist before humans were there. But we, through culture, are able to make letters physical and put them in books and in all kinds of media. So we make them physical. They do exist because we created them that way. Now, we can talk about God. Does it exist? Well, we are not able to incarnate God in a physical way. We can incarnate books that talk about God. We can incarnate symbols that reference God. And actually, there are people, and sometimes religious people, who realize that God is an emanation of our own psyches. Fine. That's cool. That works. But for people who are describing God as an external entity separate from our own incarnation, they can't show in any form the existence of this external entity.
Okay, my fun question, it got split into two ways. Is there something in your life about you that someone might accuse you of being a hero for?
Well, I don't think my children would.
What's that?
I don't think my children would.
Okay.
Who would be, likely candidates for hero worship. But no, they're a little too. They're not necessarily more cynical than anybody else, but they're cynical enough to know that I'm very mortal, and I hope they respect me. But I don't think hero worship is a part of that. So beyond that, no one thinks I'm a hero.
Come on. Getting up in front of people and speaking to some people is worse than the fear of death. And you do that.
That's right. Some people are very, very uncomfortable in public speaking.
So there's nothing about you that's heroic?
No, just because I'm able to do that does not make me heroic. It makes me capable of speaking in front of the public.
Well, I'll have to work harder at finding your superpower. Okay, the other version of that, I initially asked if you were a superhero, what would your powers be? And some people, they took it to the comic books and movies and cartoons and things like that, and answered it that way. So if you were in a comic book or cartoon or movie, and you could have any superpower, what would that be? And what would your superhero name be?
It's a universe that I don't really spend a lot of time thinking about.
That's fine.
Certainly I would like to be able to, in a very selfish way, be able to influence people's beliefs, get in their mind, and show them what I see. I don't know that we would call it a superhero power, at least not traditionally, but it's a way of thinking about it.
Telepathy, that'd be a superpower.
Well, telepathy is about perceiving what other people are thinking, as opposed perhaps to influencing what they're thinking. Of course, it would be a very scary power, because I would be, if in fact I could read people's minds and influence them, I would be seeing and hearing things that I really wouldn't want to know. But in any case, it's all nice and hypothetical.
So if you could control people's minds, what would your first order be? I don't normally ask that question.
Well, no, now that's a fun question, because what it means, first I have to think about what it is I want. So the very first question was, what's important?
Yeah.
Well, it's easy to be flippant about that, because it's just me and my family, and then everything else, the universe. But now if I can get into other people's heads, now I have to decide what's important to communicate to other people who aren't my family. And that changes the whole argument.
Yes.
So I'm just gonna, do the stream of consciousness, which is, so I'm a progressive person. I believe there should not be racism and xenophobia. I'd like to believe, against all rational knowledge, that utopia is possible. Certainly there's nothing in the real world that suggests to me that it is possible. But given the power, let's go with it. Certainly there was a time in the past where I was very fond of the idea of utopia, or at least people being able to get along and cooperate and live in a peaceful world that benefits everybody. So the first thing would be, I think, to be able to get people to move away from xenophobia. The fear of strangers, or the fear of people who look different than you, or the fear of people, whatever the social situation is, who you distrust. And get them to think in terms of how cooperation would benefit everybody. So in game theory, these psychologists create these games that are basically economic kinds of games, where you have a certain amount of money, and your ability to earn more money depends on your ability to cooperate with other people. But there's always these conditions where there's the selfish outcome versus the non-selfish outcome, and they tend to set up these games that the more you cooperate, the more you earn. However, if you're selfish, you can still earn more, and your partner earns less.
Yes.
So those kinds of things are fun to think about, and so it would be, I would try to figure out how to play the game at the level of cooperation where, if everybody works together, we all benefit more than otherwise. But in fact, interestingly, they're testing these concepts of game theory, and it exists at evolutionary levels in different ways. And certainly they've tested monkeys with these kinds of games, and people. And this is where they get the idea that altruism exists. Now, it tends to exist more with people and monkeys who know each other versus those that don't.
Right.
But nevertheless, there's a basis, a model to move it forward. So back to the original question, which is, what would I do if I had that power to go in other people's heads? We would work towards making them feel that cooperation is going to result in more benefit to them, economically and socially in all different ways, than if they were fearful and xenophobic and prejudiced.
And I've thought about the mind control and world domination and all that kind of stuff. I think the first thing I would do to command people is to control their own mind. And then they are now free of religion or authority figures, and they're free to have their own reason for doing or saying or believing something. And now we can actually communicate. Because if I'm communicating to you, but I'm really communicating to your God through you, that doesn't help me. I need to communicate to you because you and I are interacting. And you mentioned utopia. My concept for the perfect world is pseudo-utopia, which is a fake perfection. Just because utopia might not ever exist doesn't mean we shouldn't try. And so pseudo-utopia is trying for better.
Right.
Along the lines of a more perfect union that they wanted to form.
That's right. Well, it's pretty educational to look at the various attempts that have been made. And historically, there are a number. I don't know how many, maybe a lot. But certainly there's a few that are of fairly recent history. Maybe, going back a couple hundred years, these various utopias, and they all break down for various reasons and fairly predictable reasons. So, one of them is that there's always a strong leader who takes advantage of being a strong leader. When you have, say, a truer utopia where there's less of a leadership and more egalitarian approach, it's very hard to move because people have a hard time coordinating without a strong leader. So it's a tough one.
And part of me ruling the world, I would only rule it with everyone else.
Yes, then there's that wonderful adage about absolute power.
Yes.
Corrupts absolutely. So it sounds great, and I agree with you 100%. Make me king, and I'm going to be a good king, and I'm going to not abuse my power. Yeah, well, let's find out. I don't mind trying, but typically very, very rare that people can really pull it off because you just
get greedy.
Yeah, it's just human nature. It's really hard not to be the wanting to exercise that power.
Okay, I've definitely gone beyond my normal questions, although I started a second interview process. But the last question in my first set of interview questions is, would you like to ask me any questions? And the field is completely open.
Well, I think it's very cool that you're doing these interviews, but I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you have some kind of goal or hope that you learn from these things, and so I'm wondering what that is.
The multiple answers that I've given are all true. It ranges from I want to get to know people to, being around more atheists and people telling me that atheists all believe certain things when I don't believe them, but I consider myself in that group.
Right.
Now I can ask other people what they have to say.